Next up, we have MacKenzie Sigalos moderating a panel on why we need Web3 social media. Welcome, MacKenzie. Welcome, panel. Cool. Go ahead and take mine. Sure.
Thanks. Panelists, come on up here. I'm Mac. I'm a tech reporter at CNBC. And I'm going to just go down the line and have everyone introduce themselves. So, Frances, you're first up.
My name is Frances Haugen, and I am an advocate for social media accountability and transparency. You may have heard of me before as the Facebook whistleblower, though I am only one of many, and I'm very happy to be here.
Hi, Mike, check. Hi, Richard Muirhead from Fabric Ventures, kind of builder turned backer, and we are actively exploring all of the important possibilities of Web3 social media.
Stani?
Stani Kulechov, so I'm the founder and CEO of Aave. We're a company that built the Aave protocol in DeFi and Lens protocol, which is a way of creating a online presence on the in the Web3.
Hi, my name is Chris Gulczynski. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Niche. We're building a Web3 decentralized network. Previously, I was one of the co-founders of Tinder. I helped invent the swipe, and I co-created Bumble.
So I want to key in on Elon Musk and Twitter and what it's been like having him in charge there. In some ways, it lays bare the risk of centralized ownership of a major communications platform. A lot of you, as you just explained in your bios, are in some capacity working with blockchain to mitigate those problems. But do you right now see the average social media user really caring about decentralization and owning their data? And I put this question to the entire panel.
The way I usually frame, people ask, why would people want to move from a centralized platform to a decentralized platform? And I think one of the big opportunities is that decentralized social networks introduce interesting opportunities around self-governance. That we've kind of come to accept that we are subjects of like a king, like Mark or Elon, and we can either follow their rules or leave. And there's an interesting opportunity for people to be citizens of their platforms, having an ability to vote, but also having responsibilities that come with that. And I think in general, when you ask people, do you want to be able to influence things you care about or not influence things you care about? People in general say, I would rather have the ability to influence things that I care about. And my online identity and my online community are something that mean a lot to a lot of people.
Let me pile into this one. So, and actually, I'm torn because I kind of agree with you, but actually there's a debate that happens a lot internally within our firm, at least, as to kind of how we're going to affect this transition from, Web 2 to Web 3. And I think, I think humans are particularly bad at kind of looking after themselves, or kind of not waiting until the issues occurred and then bolting the barn door. And so I think the problem is that that is the case, and I think sometimes though that we've proven within Web3 that particularly if you get a hold of early adopters, you can incentivize them through ownership to really change their behavior. But ultimately, these new forms of social media and Web3 need to solve some, new problem uniquely to compel people to adopt them. And so I think that's where some of the sort of the thesis work that we do comes out. But I think another way of looking at it is that we're kind of asking the wrong question. Like, why do we need Web3 social media? I would posit that actually, whereas in Web 2, Zuckerberg came along and kind of bolted on a crude form of, social onto Web 1 to create Web 2, with Web 3, this has been a grassroots movement that is intrinsically social from the get-go. Identity is baked in cryptographically. You bring your social capital to the apps that are being built. You actually bring your capital to the apps that are being built and your data and so forth. And so that everything that is built, all the apps that are going to be built, now that we are finally going to have a stack that you can develop them on, we've got some of them on the stage here, they're going to have those social aspects. And they could be doing anything from addressing sustainability or co-owning a sports team or dating or whatever, or getting a job. but solving a real problem, not necessarily going after the big guys from out of the gates.
I also think the kind of idea, like distinction between like Web 2 and Web 3 is also kind of like unnecessary, because like just a simple question for the audience, like who of you think that the internet is a cool place? So internet is cool, right? Okay, so do you think the Web 3 is cool? Like, is crypto cool? No, yeah, equal amount of audience like agree that like internet is, well, you know, it creates opportunities. And I think what's personally exciting for me is that I grew up over online. So, you know, starting with gaming and getting better broadband connection and being able to get information across globally and making connections as well. So first time ever with the internet, you can actually find people across the world that share the same ideas, and they don't necessarily live in the same neighborhood as you do. And I think it's kind of interesting because Web 2, it really made it very easy to actually connect, and the bigger social media platforms as well. You can share content, you can find information that's valuable for you. And obviously, what changed over the past decade and a half is that, you know, all these relationships that we're making all the time, we start to make more and more relationships actually online. But the thing that we want to change is that identity part. So being able to actually have a ownership of your presence. So the connections you are making over online, the audiences you're building, the monetization streams you're building. As a user, you kind of are in a place that you really should have that ownership. And that's what Web3 is about. It really brings, it commoditizes the internet and brings it closer to you and also gives you a share of that. And I think usually when I think about building protocols, also I think about, you know, we have to build something that is better, faster, stronger, meaning that, you know, if you are using Web3 social media applications and you have to sign every transaction, or, you know, the user experience isn't what you're used to, we're not getting far. And those are the things that we're focusing in with our team, that how we can just build better social, and then you get those benefits of whatever ownership provides you as a user.
But I feel like with social platforms, like the big problem is really getting to scale. And so like we've kind of dissected a lot of and you did a great job of breaking down the advantages once you're there. But nobody wants to be on a new platform where they don't have a network yet, where their friends aren't already on there with them. And so when you think of centralized owners, they can invest in marketing to drive early scale. But how do decentralized platforms like a Lens scale? And who drives that usage how? I just feel like this hasn't been done successfully just yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the technical scale part, which we're actually getting in a good shape because, you know, a lot of things that wasn't possible to do with the blockchain is actually viable now. So with the layer 2s and more scalability solutions as well. But when it comes to the actual user and community scale, what I found very fascinating is that when you actually give the ownership of the profiles and audiences to the users, you know, the way you build the applications, you actually have the flexibility to go from one application to another, and you retain your user base. And what it means also for the developers and that are building the new experiences is that when they integrate Lens into their existing application as a social layer, or they're building some sort of a new, cool, interesting use case, they can actually use the existing user base. And it's kind of like a idea of building together or growing together. So Lens is kind of like a garden where, you know, you have a lot of people coming in and planting seeds, and you're basically cultivating together with the community and other users and developers. And you know, it's a big database, but end of the day, the applications can choose what they want to curate and what kind of experience. So, example, there is one application or a product actually called Enzo Collective, and they're simply creating a digital closet where you can collect fashion as NFTs, and they use Lens protocol for doing that and sharing whatever you have in your digital wardrobe. And that use case is something that is very novel. And they're curating the audience from the Lens protocol itself, which is quite interesting. So when you make it very easy, you kind of like mitigate the chicken and egg problem as well for those who want to build new experiences.
I think in general, you can broadly divide social media into two buckets. There's broadcast social media, where creators don't really care about exactly who they reach. You know, you're not creating because you want to reach one specific person or you want to reach your grandma. You want as much reach as possible. And that's why you see clones of things like TikTok inside of YouTube, inside of Instagram, inside of Snapchat. And then you have personal social media. That's where you're not creating because you want someone to see it. You're creating because you want grandma to see it. And I totally agree with you that there are network effect problems where like you have to get everyone in one place at the same time. But a number of new novel social networks have been rolling out over the last few years that are borrowing the same playbook from Facebook. They start at places like college campuses. They start with fraternities. You know, they start with discrete communities, and they go after those discrete communities so that you do get that coincidental effect. Like, you know, everyone you want is there. And so I think it's this question of what problem are you trying to solve? Because if you're going after the broadcast use case, it doesn't matter if not everyone's there yet. You're still building from a beginning community. And if you want to get that network thing, you're just going to have to adopt a similar playbook to what Facebook did.
And right now, when I think about some of the most prominent decentralized social media alternatives, there are a lot of, you know, Twitter substitutes. And so we talked about Lens, and then there's Nostr and Blue Skies coming out. You come from the world of Tinder and Bumble. Like, tell me about when we're going to diversify out, because right now you don't have like the Instagram alternative or something in that other category.
I don't think it's good enough just to have a Web3 version of Instagram or Twitter. I think there's got to be a new set of like values or like a new proposition that we're giving to consumers to actually do this. That's like the chicken or the egg problem. There's got to be something for whoever to cross the road to get to it, I think. Like there's no reason for me to jump onto something because it's decentralized or whatever. Like the previous question, like, does it matter? Is it decentralized? I think to a consumer, no. Does it matter that it's built on privacy? Does it matter that it's distributed ownership? Does it matter, you know what I mean, X, Y, Z? Those are things that actually matter to people, and it's up to, I think, people that are building the consumer layers to translate what that technology does into a new value proposition to the end consumer. And that's what's going to drive, I think, mass adoption and use and value, and people coming back to it and that are going to find value in it.
Totally. I mean, you're going to see the innovation in the kind of Lens garden for all these different kind of possible models, though around fashion, whatever it is. You've got your model with you know, the different niches that you support, but I think, you know, and people, maybe they don't care about self-sovereignty of their data enough to change their behavior. You know, maybe they don't care about privacy enough. But if you take the ownership question and translate it into the ability to innovate around the business models, now that these different niche social sites are freed from the ad revenue kind of tyranny,
it's an incentive question, I think.
Yeah.
We were talking about that before. It's the only incentive model now is to drive ad sales, because that's the only way we've been able to monetize networks, is to co-opt the connection to one another for ad sales. So that dictates a certain model of behavior on the platform. And if we can take that away and start building value for the creators and give them new methods to monetize through, you know, club membership or this, that, or the other, that changes everything.
One of the social networks, or the new novel ones that I'm most excited about, is actually a centralized one. It's called Post News. And one of the reasons why I find it so interesting is it goes after that incentives question. You know, they say right now when you look at Substack, there are a small fraction of creators on Substack that make money, but most make almost nothing. If you could begin saying, you could tip someone for an article, like you wrote an article, I'm willing to give you a 5-cent tip, a 10-cent tip. I'm willing to do a micro subscription to this thing. I'm not willing to pay $25 a month for the Sacramento Bee, but I do really want to read this article. I'm willing to do a micro payment for that. I think those kinds of models have a huge opportunity, especially in a Web3 context.
Web3 lends itself to social. It reinforces the point. There's an economy built into it. DAOs are a fantastic model of self-organization.
I also think that the incentives that we have in social media, they really suck at this point, because like if you want to have like 5 million views or like 10 million views and then you get like $4 as a creator, to me it's kind of like a bullshit. And I think even like bigger social media platforms, they start to incentivize creators in a monetary way. And I think that's good for creators. But I think as long as the creators, as long as they don't own their audiences, and they depend on many of these platforms, there's not going to be equal economy in that sense. So, creators will do whatever the platforms will do, because they own those audiences and audiences and distribution. And I think something that the decentralization aspect can really help is to shift that power to actually the creators itself and the users. And maybe that way, the actual businesses have to think about how they can attract the audience and puts them into a different kind of a competition.
And I think one way you could think of this is you can either compensate creators with solely money, which is kind of what we just talked about, or you can compensate them with control, right? And in a world where your ability to create and then create content that is consumed earns you some kind of influence to then govern, that's a platform that's very attractive to creators. And in the end, content is what drives the success of social networks.
I mean, and this is what we've just been touching on, like this concept of social fi and financial infrastructure being crucial to Web3 social. On the other side, so regulation, like this is the biggest topic with so many of the people who I'm speaking to as they're navigating their business models. Frances, you've been all over the world speaking to lawmakers who are trying to understand how to regulate around this space. And you've been talking about it in the context of the existing like big tech players that are kind of controlling the social media ecosystem. What is it? How does that ripple into Web3 social?
I think there's going to be some interesting challenges in coming years, and I have a fireside tomorrow where we talk about how people have been disparaging things like Web3 social media or end-to-end encrypted social media by playing the safety card. They'll say, oh, this is dangerous. These forms of social media are dangerous because they're private. And intrinsically, none of these systems have to be dangerous. We can design for safety as we go along. But I think one of the things that's going to be a thing that we have to think about proactively is laws are being passed around the world now that say if you get bigger than a certain size, you're going to have certain transparency requirements. And so either that's going to lead to a world where we have many fragmented, smaller than a certain size networks, or we need to plan for success and say how can we be ready to open the curtain a little bit about how we administer these platforms.
I can add one interesting thing is that, especially when kind of like as a user, you don't really have to rely on one particular platform or a client, and you remove the idea of network and the actual application. It creates a lot of choices for the users, and I think what's valuable there is that maybe you start to see applications that are like communities. So. Something that I actually like about Mastodon is that as a federated network, it really allows people to create communities and values and content moderation policies and rules for those communities. And for me, what's interesting is that what we might see in the future is that we have different kinds of policies that these communities are setting, and you as a user, you can choose a community that is aligned with your values and the trust and safety policies, and you have more choice there. That's something that I'm very excited to see in the future.
I think by organizing into those types of communities, it naturally silos that type of content or whatever in its own community, right? And it kind of limits that crossover. Right now, we're in one big wagon wheel of a network, and we see everything. So.
Exactly, and so building on the incentive point, you're kind of drawn like, birds of a feather flocking together around a particular niche because of the content, and you're drawn to it because maybe there's plugged in a different business model that is not ad revenue driven. But I think an interesting aspect that's going to play out going forward is that we've got algorithms driving ad revenue historically where we've been used as the product. We've given up our data, willingly, unwillingly, whatever. And going forward, there's going to be increasingly sophisticated algorithms that are going to be kind of constructing search results, different opinions, hopefully sort of consensus around moderation and truth and even hate speech and the rest of it. And so it's more important than ever that we get to choose how we give up our data to train those algorithms, and how we maybe even give up our opinion to express the kind of how good the outcomes, how good the outcomes of those algorithms are. So I think we're going to move into a kind of even more complex and critical environment, that actually, whether it's from regulation or whether it's from the innovations in Web3, hopefully we'll get this proliferation of choice for the user. It's going to be an important thing.
I mean, what are the bottlenecks right now of Web3 social media, and how are you working to resolve them in your respective capacities?
Sorry, could you repeat that question? The echo is really bad.
No, just like, what are the bottlenecks right now?
There's a lot of market stigma, right? Just in what's happening. A lot of the times, if I say I'm building a Web3 decentralized whatever, it's like the blank stares. But if I'm saying I'm building the next evolution of social networks that focuses on people owning their networks and this, that, and the other, okay, that starts to resonate. So I feel like we're trying to almost like obfuscate away all the Web3 stuff and just like really like stake that hypothesis of like, this is a new core benefit based on like a tech stack. Like I don't really think about Facebook tech stack when I post on Facebook groups, nor really should you. And I think the same goes for Web3. If it's going to be ubiquitous, you shouldn't have to think about the technology. You should just see the benefit of it.
Yeah, and I echo that as well, because it's you have to take the complexity away from the actual consumer-facing part. And that's something that when we were building Lens, we tried to figure out like how we make these applications and clients that are building on Lens, how they could actually function the same way as any internet application. And coming from a bit more Web3 background, it's actually something that you really need to shift your mind about, because you're not building financial applications, you're building pretty much like non-financial applications, and you want the experience to be pretty much something that the consumers are used to. And I'm super excited how actually today, if you use one of these Lens applications, when you post content, it reflects right away, but the actual blockchain logic happens in the background. And also, second thing is that how much blockchain you actually need. So it depends on the use case. Maybe you want to secure the actual profile with a blockchain. Maybe you want to keep the followers in a database still to have more privacy. Or maybe you want to have them on a blockchain so that you can actually secure that audience for your users. And then you can decide whether the content has to be NFTs and can be collectibles, which could fit well, for example, for a music audience and distributing music. But then if you have something more intimate, maybe you want to still use off-chain solutions. So there's sort of design choices. And beyond the technicalities, you need to build an amazing application on top of that people are excited about. So that's the biggest challenge on any social, regardless of the tech.
It has to be easy. It can't be complex. It can't be any more complex than what the internet is right now. In fact, I would argue it has to be simpler, right?
And just to roll back through history, when we got Web 2, part of the reason we got that was technology got to the point where we had enough bandwidth that we could pull down data in the background. We got to the point where JavaScript had enough capabilities that we could do those asynchronous kinds of actions. We're getting more and more to the place where you can start to build really compelling, intuitive applications. And I think we should expect to see only accelerating growth in the next 5 years.
Well, one thing I think of, and maybe Stani, you can speak to it in the context of Lens, but there is this wait time interacting with the blockchain. So like, which part of user social media interactions should be on chain and which should be off chain?
I think it really depends on the use case, and I don't put a lot of distinction between blockchain and rest of the technological stack, because it really depends on what you're building. I think it's a cool idea to have a sense of ownership of a profile, and maybe also on the follower graph. So especially for creators, because they benefit for having ownership over their audience and having that relationship in a way where it's not locked into one particular platform. But when it comes to the actual content, I think it really depends on the use case, and I don't think there's any good answer from me, because usually the builders that are building a particular use case, they usually know the product better, what fits them well. But I think it's building Web3 social is building like any other application. You have to talk to your users, what they like, what they hate, and how they get closer to something that people actually enjoy using.
So we're over time, but before we go, I'd love to hear from everyone on the panel about where are we with decentralized social media by the end of the year? Like, what are your predictions for where we end 2023? Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm just going to say, this has been a 10-year journey. People talked about a Web3 stack first, basically, sort of 2014, so coming up to 10 years ago. And I think the push for a world computer upon which we could build these things got hijacked by the people's desire to have a world casino for a little bit, forgetting that actually those capabilities of handling value and identity and so forth that we were building into the stack actually were most useful for Lens. With the greatest respect to Aave, Lens is is perhaps going to be the main show, and so I think when you ask the question of what's the bottleneck right now, I think we got ahead of ourselves in some. We're a little impatient. I think there has not been a bottleneck that we suddenly need to fix. There's been a lot of work going on. We're now reaching the point, I think, to the point that's been made by the panelists, that it's going to be possible to build these apps. And that's going to happen right now. We see it happening on this stage, happening downstairs in the basement, and not before too soon, because I think it's critical for everything from society to the emotional health of children.
I don't keep close enough track on these things, so I'd only embarrass myself by making predictions. But I do think it's a thing where people are experimenting more and more, and I get written to probably once a month or once every month by a new social network that is like, oh, we want to collaborate, and so I'm just excited to see how much energy there is in the space.
I think we will see the rise of consumer-friendly applications in Web3, like the Web 2.5 kind of forays into people staking hypotheses onto hey, this is something better than Web 2.0. Come check it out.
I would like to see some entrepreneurs that are starting Web3 social applications and using already existing protocol and tapping into that user base and just trying to build small, interesting use cases. And if it doesn't work, just leaving the app to the community and moving to the next one and reiterating. So one thing about Web3 social is that when you have a social graph that anyone can tap into and compute as well, it means that you can actually build faster and necessarily if the application is very successful and people love it, then that takes takes things forward. But I like to see actually tries and failures and just make that process easier. And when it comes to the point where we're in the state of game development, we see a lot of games, most of them don't take off. And if you see the same way that we have a lot of new interesting applications on social, and most of them will not take off, but we will make it more easier for entrepreneurs to build faster and iterate. That will be my expectation.
Well, thank you to the panelists and to everyone who joined us today. It's been a pleasure joining you at ETH Denver. So, thanks, guys.